I'm here alongside our Meet the Press moderator, Kristen Welker, and our chief White House correspondent, Peter Alexander. NBC's chief political analyst, Chuck Todd, is joining us as well. So there's a lot to get into here. And Kristen and Peter, I'll start with you, and then Chuck, I want you to jump in as well. This is obviously, maybe, the last word that we will see in a primetime stage from anybody in this ticket here. One of the things that we all talked about prior to this debate happening were the favorability numbers, right? Governor Walz has the highest of any person on the ticket. Senator Vance has the lowest. Did anything change that tonight? And does likability matter?
Well, look, likability could matter around the edges, particularly when you are dealing with such a close race, because any and everything could impact voters when a race is this close, particularly if you look at the polls in the battleground states. It was very clear that Senator Vance knew that his challenge tonight was to be more likable. And Hallie, I got texts from Republicans who
they're very happy. I'll tell you,
he had an incredibly strong night.
That's right.
And Democrats who acknowledge he came off as likable on some of the issues, by the way, that they felt as though Walz should have been on offense and Vance should have been on defense, like abortion. One Democrat saying to me that he felt as though there were some missed opportunities there on Walz's part. Having said all of that, I do think that the final moment of the debate will be one of the most significant, one that will loom over the rest of the debate, which is when Governor Walz asked Vance point blank, did Donald Trump lose the election? And he said, I want to focus on the future. And of course, he called that a non-answer. And the significance of that, I think, because democracy has been rising as a key issue for voters. So when you think about what voters care about, that is one of them. And again, when you talk about, does this matter? It matters because this race is so close, and winning over or alienating some of those undecided voters around the edges can make a difference.
Candidly, I would say that the Democrats are probably happy that the presidential debate matters a lot more than the vice presidential debate. Clearly, J.D. Vance was a much more polished communicator. For those who have said, you know, he may be unlikable, he delivered the message that he wanted to get across tonight most of the time. You can agree or disagree with what he was saying, but I think that's the biggest takeaway here. I think there were two things that struck me in particular. One is they tried to determine who this was a referendum on. Tim Walz tried to make this election a referendum on Donald Trump and the way he created this country during his time in office. J.D. Vance tried to make it a referendum on the Biden and Harris administration, all these times saying that this is Harris's policies.
Unlike Donald Trump, didn't drop Joe Biden's name a whole bunch of times. He focused very much on Kamala Harris.
But at the end of the day, I mean, think about it. Tonight we said we had, you know, Taylor Swift's name was mentioned once, Ukraine was mentioned 0 times, right? At the end of the day, I think that the decisions are made by big issues and, most importantly, how they are viewed by, as we look at Tim Walz, by these others.
So as D.C. people, we know what it's like to try to get a slice of pizza in town. New York City pizza, nothing like it. He is at New York Pizza getting a late-night snack in an off-the-record capacity. Let me, what they call an OTR stop, I should say. Let me listen in real quick and see if we can hear. Yep. All right, so he's picking out a slice. We've got the audio up here, just in case he takes any questions.
Does he cut it with a fork and knife? That can be a politically advantageous or problematic decision.
That's a deep pull, Peter, for the younger folks watching. Chuck, let me bring you into the conversation as we keep an eye on this. We're, of course, looking to see Senator Vance over in the spin room here. What's interesting is while there is a discussion, and I've heard this from folks who I was in touch with on text during the debate, a discussion of policy. A lot of folks thought this was substantive. I would put this to you. There were a lot of policy questions. There was discussion about various policies. There weren't necessarily a whole lot of super clear policy answers on some of these outstanding queries that came up.
No, there was a lot of polite word salad, both by Governor Walz and Senator Vance, where they would be respectful of it and they would come say something about agreement.
Hey, Chuck, I'm going to be so annoying. I'm sorry. He's talking to the report. Oh, God, we missed it. I'm sorry. It's like one of these awkward things, right? Like he's going to pick out the pizza. He's going to say how he thinks he did in the debate. We want to catch that. But it's like this, you know, audio situation here. So keep going, and I might interrupt you again.
No worries. No worries. No, hey, it's live TV. That's the whole point. The real question is, will he fold the pizza, right, and eat it that way? You got to fold it in half if you're going to get the big floppy, right? And you better get a big floppy slice, right? The double, you know. For me, I have flashbacks to Cazzolis. All right, that's what a kid of the '80s went to a mall and got a Cazzolis. But anyway. But going back, you're right, in fairness. Look, I thought the issue matrix that CBS came up with was terrific. There were really only 2 issues we didn't touch on that I thought were missing. One was the threat to China, to the Pacific Rim, and one, of course, is the threat of Russia and Ukraine. But we got to a lot of domestic issues, or at least they, certainly the questions were there, and they were almost afraid of the details. Look, Vance was a much better performer. I think we knew that going in. This is pretty much what he's done his adult life, is talk and debate, right? He hasn't had a lot of other experiences, and I say this with respect. I mean, that's what a U.S. Senator does, and he was quite good at this. And I'd also bring up one other issue. I think you can tell the difference. Which candidate does plenty of TV interviews, even with tough interviewers like Kristen Welker, and which candidate does not do tough interviews with people like Kristen Welker? It's Tim Walz, right? And Walz totally face-planted on that question about his fish story about Tiananmen Square. And I think had he done a few interviews that with the mainstream media, with not just with people that want him to succeed, he'd have gotten better at these answers. I think Vance's performance was better because he faced challenging interviews. And, there's no better debate prep for these presidential and vice presidential candidates than a good, tough accountability interview. And I think the Harris-Walz campaign is playing a prevent defense that is, I think there's a reason why Kamala Harris wants another debate. She needs another format, and if they're going to sit here and be afraid of doing media interviews, they need something. And I think Walz's uneven performance, I think he had some strong moments, particularly when he was prosecuting a case against Trump. But I think his inability to defend the Biden-Harris administration very well at times, and of course his faceplant on the fish story about Tiananmen Square, I think is a reminder that, they haven't done much batting practice here with tough interviewers.
Which is interesting, Chuck, and just to give folks a sense of it, I don't know if we have that live shot still up. If you were looking at J.D. Vance in the spin room, that's because he's currently doing, I think, a cable news interview. We think it is likely that he will come down on the floor. He'll probably chat with Garrett. He might stop by and see Tom. I don't know. We're going to take you back to the spin room when that happens, as, of course, Governor Walz has just stopped with his wife to get a late-night slice of pizza, I think here in Midtown, New York Pizza, not too far from where we are. To pick up on Chuck's point, I was struck, Peter, by Jen Psaki, somebody who you know well from covering the White House, former, of course, White House staffer, former campaign staffer.
She said just this.
Exactly, that she believes that they are doing a disservice to Governor Walz and to Vice President Harris by not getting him out more when he was the guy, as she noted and as we all noted, who came up with the whole weird attack doing one of these cable news interviews on Donald Trump in the first place. Yeah,
and it was that weird attack, right, as you say, that went viral, that made him very conversational, folksy, and likable by a lot of Americans, frankly, as they got to know him. He was plus 13, as they say, 13 points more in terms of the people that liked him than those who didn't like him. That's a positive thing, but you didn't really get to see a lot of that guy in the conversations we've been having with people close to him. I think, candidly, the way that he was prepared for that debate, there's going to be some frustration, not around some of those people who knew him best. He acknowledged going into tonight on nights like this, he's not as good of a debater. None of that really matters, though, at the end of the day. This was the high water mark for both of these candidates. Tomorrow, the conversation, again, is about Donald Trump and Kamala Harris, right? So he wasn't able to take advantage on it. The question, I think, really more than anything for me right now is Kamala Harris's numbers were as good as they have been so far 2 weeks after her debate. Now we're getting further and further away from her debate. We're seeing a little bit of erosion in her numbers right now. And with crises going on from the floods in the southeast due to the Hurricane Helene, with what's happening overseas between Israel, Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas right now, where does she find another moment to sort of go viral, to get people's attention again?
I'm looking away from you, Peter, not because I'm not absolutely hanging on every word, but because I'm looking at what Senator Vance is talking about here, because he was asked about something that Chuck and you have just talked about, which is this idea that perhaps Governor Walz felt nervous at parts of the debate. And Senator Vance says he didn't notice it. He says he himself was nervous because he acknowledges this is the biggest stage of his life. He tried not to focus on the demeanor too much, but an interesting acknowledgement there from the senator.
It is an interesting acknowledgement. It goes back to the civility that we've been talking about throughout the evening, that this was a remarkably civil debate, particularly in the wake of the debate that we all covered of former President Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris. I do think, to Peter's point, the question becomes about strategy now, because the polls are getting tighter. And with thanks to Chuck for his comments about doing a tough interview, will she start to give more interviews? Does the campaign decide that that is now going to be part of their equation in order to move the needle and in order to try to regain the momentum that she clearly had after she was first at the top of the ticket and after her debate with former President Trump. So I think that that's going to be a big question. We'll have to see what they decide. But I do think, go back to the Iran exchange, the very first exchange of this entire debate.
By the way, top of mind to Peter's point.
Yes,
very newsy, breaking
October
developments
surprise.
There today.
Here we are with an October surprise. It framed the entire debate in some ways because that was the moment where you saw both of them trying to say, you're the incumbent. No, you, meaning former President Trump is the incumbent. Vice President Kamala Harris is the incumbent. She's currently in the White House. And it was very clear that that's going to be the strategy of these two campaigns moving forward.
Who has ownership of this idea of being a change candidate or not? I think Chuck is still with us because the interesting thing here, we've been saying this 35 days until Election Day, right? But keep in mind, some voters in battleground states are already getting their early ballots. You've got Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin coming up in the next 2 weeks. You've got Arizona, Georgia, and Nevada all starting their early in-person and mail-in voting. I mean, voters are out there, right? Like, we don't have to wait until November 5th for people to start making their decisions. And so all of these become data points to feed in to folks who are getting out there in these critical states.
Yeah, no, I think you're exactly right. This is the complaint. Donald Trump is making the argument, hey, people are already voting. It's too late for us to debate again. You'll remember in 2016 and 2020, of course, he did debate after people were already voting here. But I think that Kamala Harris is the one, frankly, that would benefit more by another debate, not just because she did so well in the first one, but really she's the one who's still, in a way, introducing herself to some of those undecided voters, those voters that have yet to come around. I started the conversation at the beginning of this. If you weren't with us then, I'll repeat it now, which is to the Harris folks that I'm speaking to. They say that little sliver of voters, the undecided ones are still voting on, they say they are young, they're most often male, and they're racially diverse. But it's a small sliver, and it's people who are not watching tonight's debate. You got to find those people where they are, and the Harris campaign is quietly trying to do that. Are they able to get to them in time for November 5th?
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.